As you might already know, Yezdi motorcycles have made a comeback. Well, yes, in January 2022, they launched not just one but three new motorcycles. Starting with the Roadster that's right next to me, followed by the Adventure, which is a rival to the Himalayan, and then there's the Yezdi Scrambler, which is the most affordable scrambler that you can buy in the country right now. The question is, these motorcycles have been on sale for a month now, but we don't really know what they have on offer. Of course, they share the same underpinnings, but as you can see, each of these caters to different style of riding. The Roadster is more road focused, the Adventure is of course an entry-level ADV, whereas the Scrambler, well, it's meant for light off-roading and it looks quite cool. The thing is, are these motorcycles worth the hype? Well, today that's what we are going to find out, as we are going to ride all three motorcycles today. Of course, we are short on time, so it is not a definitive verdict because we want to ride these motorcycles out on the road. But then today is the day when we get our first taste of these motorcycles. So let's get up and ride these motorcycles and find out if Yezdi, all three of these, are worth the hype.
You're watching the AutoX YouTube channel. You can also get your daily dose of all things automotive on our website autox.com and follow us on social media. Don't forget to check out our monthly magazine and make sure to hit the bell and subscribe button so you don't miss a thing.
Now, the first bike that I rode today is the Scrambler, and I think this is the coolest of the lot. I personally think this is the best looking. Now, of course, all three motorcycles share the same engine. So this one has a 334cc single cylinder engine, but in terms of power output, this develops 29 bhp and 28 Newton meters of torque. Out on the road, I think this is a very impressive motorcycle. It's very refined, and there is of course a lot of performance. The thing with this engine is it is very refined and it's quite linear. You don't really get a lot of performance because of course it is a heavy motorcycle. It weighs around 180 kilograms, so it's not light by any measure. But the biggest grouse is this engine. It is quite peaky, so under 4000 rpm you don't really get a lot of punch, and if you're riding it in the hills, steep inclines, well, you will see the bike struggling to keep the momentum. That's what I felt, because in second or third gear it really struggles to pick up when you have to go uphill. So that's about it, but other than that, the engine is quite tractable. But the moment you take this motorcycle off-road, well, that's where it starts going downhill for the Scrambler. You see, this is a motorcycle that's probably suited just for the road. We rode it off-road and it felt out of its depth. Front forks, they dive in a lot and it is quite bouncy and it feels very mushy as well. So I think the problem today was that we are riding at a very hardcore off-road trail. So on those rocky trails, this thing was not able to keep up, and it was a struggle because the bike would just not stop following. So that was the thing, because I didn't quite enjoy riding it off-road as much as I did on the road. The other thing is the tires. These are road biased tires, so out on gravel, out on roads. So these tires are really not meant for that. Even if you're riding on gravel or dirt, well, these tires, they give up the ghost quite easily. So if you intend to take this off-road, I suggest you change the tires. Now, the other problem I had was the brakes, especially the ABS, which was over intrusive. The moment you touch the lever, well, it just cuts in and cuts off, and it is quite weird because you don't really brake on time, and of course it saps a lot of confidence. So when you're riding on trails, you don't have that confidence in the bike, in the braking system, and that of course affects the performance. So if you are going to buy the Scrambler, I suggest you stick to the road. Light off-roading, yeah, you can do, but you have to change the tires. Now, the other thing about this motorcycle that I quite enjoyed on the road was the handling. It is a very neutral handler. It flows around corners, even in hills. It is quite agile and it changes direction very quickly. So overall, I think in that department, it is a great motorcycle. But if you intend to take it off-road, well, I'm sorry, this is not the motorcycle to ride off-road. I felt it didn't quite have it, and more importantly, the engine, like I said, it is very peaky. You really have to rev it, and it is a short stroke engine. The gearbox also has tall gear ratios. You are not going to find yourself riding in second gear even on these trails, and even in first gear it tends to stall a lot. Below 4000 rpm, you really have to slip the clutch a lot to get going. So in terms of engine, in terms of the hardware, in terms of the suspension hardware, I don't think this is meant to go off-road. That is my only grouse. But of course, I would want to spend more time with this motorcycle on the road, especially in traffic, to see how it behaves. But first impressions, stick to the road, don't take it off-road. Of the three bikes we had today, I thought the Roadster looked the most uninspiring. But that was before I rode it, because after riding it, I think it is dynamically the most sorted of the three. On the road, it felt really composed, and the suspension and the engine, well, they were in tune. And when you're riding it on the road, it feels the most natural out of the three bikes. Well, the thing about this motorcycle is, of course, it weighs a lot. It is 184 kilograms. It is heavier than the Scrambler, but it flows in very nicely because it has an 18-inch front wheel and it's lower to the ground, and it feels very natural when you're riding it. So it has that inherent lightness in the way it tackles corners or the way it handles, and I really like that, because this is a great motorcycle in that sense. If you want to ride it daily in the city, it is a quick motorcycle, and the engine has a lot of performance. Even though it has the same engine as the Scrambler, this produces slightly more power and at lower RPMs. But then again, it also suffers from the same engine characteristic, in the sense it doesn't have a lot of grunt at low RPMs. So you really have to work the gearbox if you want to get going. But on the whole, I think this is the motorcycle that I enjoyed the most, because I rode this the most on the road. Even off-road, actually, the suspension has some sort of firmness. It's not as wallowy as the Scrambler. So when you're riding it on rough roads also, it feels more confident. There is more feel from the front end. So in that regard also, if you want to do light trails, I think this is probably better suited for that instead of the Scrambler. Now, the things I don't quite like, well, I think on all three motorcycles, the quality is not that great, but in the Roadster, it is the most evident. Like you can see the weld points here, or the paint quality in general, well, it is not up to the mark. So it doesn't feel as premium as, say, a Royal Enfield or the Honda CB350. In that regard, I think Yezdi has a lot of catching up to do. The other thing is, it is quite comfortable. The bars are wide, but then, well, these bar and mirrors, they always scrape against your hand. So when you're riding, you feel like, you know, this is they keep on bothering you when you're riding the motorcycle. And I think they could have been placed behind or somewhere else, because it always touches your wrist, and that's quite annoying. Now, one more thing that this motorcycle misses out on is the standard kit. So this doesn't get a USB port here. They have USB charging in the Scrambler as well as the Adventure, but this doesn't get it. It is an accessory, so you have to pay extra for that. Whereas on the Scrambler and the Adventure, they are standard fit. So that is the feature that's missing. So yeah, in terms of value for money, I think it is the Scrambler that gives you more bang for your buck, especially in terms of quality also. It's slightly better, I thought. And of course, to my eyes, I think it looks a lot more cooler. This is a mix between a Meteor, an Avenger, and it doesn't really work for me. Of course, it's light, it's compact, but then it doesn't have that appeal. So overall, if you look at the fundamentals, well, I think this is a job well done. And I think out of the three motorcycles, today at least, I enjoyed riding this the most. Now, the Adventure is probably the most popular of the three Yezdi motorcycles that are on sale. That's because it rivals the Himalayan. And the Himalayan has been around for a while, and that is a motorcycle that over time has become better and better with newer iterations. But the Yezdi, it's coming out for the first time, and it looks like a Himalayan for the most part. In fact, a couple of times today, I called it the Himalayan in front of Yezdi folks, and they weren't quite thrilled about it. But that's about it. Overall, I think it looks quite purposeful. It has that typical ADV look. It looks bare basics. It is bare bones. And see the kind of protection it has. Everywhere it feels sturdy. Now, in terms of quality, I don't think, again, it is up to the mark. In terms of quality, I think the Himalayan is probably slightly better. As in, I'm not saying it's not a good looking motorcycle or it has shoddy workmanship, but at some points you can see there are rough edges. So in that department, I think Yezdi will fix it. We'll give them a chance. I think this is their first product in the Adventure category. But coming back to the product, I think it's quite decent, especially on the road. It does feel like an ADV. It's quite comfortable. The engine is very refined, and it really flows around corners. It handles really well. Now, the other thing is, it has a lot of kit on offer. The LCD screen, especially on this one, it looks quite upmarket, and this is the only bike that comes with Bluetooth connectivity as well as turn-by-turn navigation. Out of the three motorcycles, Yezdi motorcycles, this is the one that has that kit. So they have loaded it up with new features, and it definitely ups its premium quotient. Now, coming to the ride experience, especially off-road, well, again, it is a bit of a mixed bag, because at low speeds, it has the same problem as the Scrambler. It is very bouncy and it is quite soft. So if you're doing low speed trail riding or low speed off-roading, well, that is where this motorcycle suffers, because the suspension is again not quite up to the task. The other problem, the bigger problem, is like the Scrambler again, this engine, it has a different tune, but again, it doesn't have low end. It doesn't have any low end, in fact. And I kept on stalling the bike. I kept on falling over just because of that. Because even in first gear, below 3000 RPM or 4000 RPM, there is absolutely nothing. If you are going up an incline, you need that momentum, you need that low end thrust. It doesn't have that. So what happens there is that it doesn't have a lot of poke, and you start slipping the clutch, and then at the same time you start to lose balance, because if the surface is uneven or it's rocky as it was today, you lose composure, and well, you are going to fall, or you're not going to go through that incline. So for me, I think that is the only fly in the ointment, because the engine, it is the weak link of this motorcycle. And the other thing is the suspension. Well, yes, of course it feels a little bouncy at low speeds, but as the speed picks up, it gets better. And I think when I was doing fast trails, because of the tires especially, it comes with C8 tires, so these tires are quite grippy as opposed to the Scrambler's tires. So on fast trails it is quite good, and the suspension also settles down and it feels more confident. Now my final problem with this motorcycle is again the brakes. The ABS, it's really intrusive, and if you're going downhill, the moment you touch the brake lever, where it just goes into some sort of overdrive and it just kicks in, kicks out. It's really weird, because for me, if you take braking out of the equation, for me a motorcycle has to brake better than it accelerates or handles, because that's where you get the confidence. You need to know that you can stop in time, and you need to know that the brakes are always there saving your face. But this one, actually not just this one, even the Scrambler, they felt really weird, and I think Yezdi engineers need to work on the ABS system. It is sourced from Continental, in fact, but I think they need to redo this, because for me the braking didn't really feel right, and I tried it multiple times on different terrains, on different surfaces, so I wasn't quite impressed with that. So which meant I couldn't really extract the maximum performance, because everywhere I'd go, the engine has no grunt, and then the brakes are also kind of mushy, kind of lacking feedback, and of course they have that ABS, which I already talked about. So for me, this motorcycle, it's a great package, but it needs refinement. It is quite good in terms of the aesthetics. I quite like it. Actually, it is a very decent motorcycle. You can say that it looks a lot like the Himalayan, but I think it looks purposeful, and for me that formula sort of works. And then it's a Yezdi, so of course it is a different brand, and they are new to the market, so I quite like it. Now in terms of highway capabilities, we didn't really ride this motorcycle at high speeds. The vibrations are there. Over 5000 RPM you will see that this engine starts buzzing, but then it has 6 gears as opposed to Himalayan, which has a 5-speed gearbox. So on highways I think you will be able to cruise comfortably. But again, the engine doesn't have a lot of grunt, so to reach triple digit speeds it is going to take you some time. But overall, I would have to say that all three motorcycles are quite good, quite decent, but they need small refinements to make them a better product. Apart from the Roadster, which I quite enjoyed, I think the Scrambler and the Adventure, they need a lot of refinements, definitely. Now between these three, of course the Roadster is going to be my pick, but in terms of refinement, in terms of quality, I think there is some room for improvement. But overall, I think Yezdi has done a tremendous job, because they have put out not 1, 3 motorcycles on sale, but they aren't quite up to the mark right now. But hopefully in the coming time they will iron out all the glitches, because otherwise in terms of capabilities, I think these motorcycles can do a lot more.